Jesus, Jesus, all I want is to be like you, Jesus.
All right, Crossroads, welcome to this week of Connect Groups. We continued on. We actually stayed put in James chapter 1, verses 13 through 15 as we continue to talk about how to tackle temptation in our lives. The story I want to relate to that I remember very vividly, and I think it really relates well to this, is back in the summer of 1998. There were two baseball players, and if you know me at all, you know that I love baseball. I enjoy football, I enjoy basketball, but baseball has always been like my favorite sport. I love to play it, I love to watch it, I enjoy the strategy of the game. Baseball had kind of lost a lot of popularity, and then the summer of 1998 happened. And you have two great hitters. You have Mark McGwire from the St. Louis Cardinals and Sammy Sosa from the Chicago Cubs. And they were going toe-to-toe with each other, trying to break the regular season home run record that most people thought would never get touched. And these two guys, I mean, they put on a show. It was so exciting that ESPN would cut away from whatever their programming was simply to show these guys when they would come to the plate to see if they'd hit another home run and get closer to the record. And then when they both finally broke the record. And if I remember right, that year, McGwire ended up with 70 home runs and Sosa ended up with 66. And everybody was so excited. It was a great year for baseball, and its popularity was back. And then the accusations came. And as things came out, it became pretty obvious that these two guys had broken the rules to get to this record. They had decided to use performance-enhancing drugs, and it put such a tarnish on what they had done. And I think their story is such an analogy of verse 15 of James 1, where desire gives birth to sin, and sin gives birth to death. These guys wanted to put on a show for the fans. It's probably how it started. They wanted to hit home runs. They wanted to be successful. They wanted to make this a big deal. And then they decided, well, if I take this, it may help me get a little bit stronger, help me recover quicker after games, and it'll make my performance better. I'm not really hurting anything. It's still me hitting the ball, and nobody's going to find out anyway. So they did it, and they put on a great show. But then when everything came out, and it was just so blatantly obvious that these guys had cheated and bent the rules, you now have two guys that put on one of the most memorable displays in Major League Baseball history. And neither one of them will probably ever sniff the Hall of Fame. Their desire gave birth to sin. And within the baseball world, obviously, these guys were still successful, but the Hall of Fame is the ultimate goal for any baseball player. And at the end of the day, that sin brings about a death in their career. They'll never make it to the Hall. See, in our lives as Christians, I don't want to see sin keep any of us from reaching that ultimate prize. I don't want sin to bring death to any of you guys. And none of us here at Crossroads do. That's why this teaching on temptation and overcoming temptation is so important, because sin can so quickly destroy you. But real quickly, let's run down Pepe's sermon notes from yesterday. I'm sorry I'm looking down. I've got my cheat sheet here. I don't have them memorized. But in Romans 8:29, we learned that the primary goal of being a Christian is to become like Christ. And we know that Christ lived a sinless life. He lived that perfect life. Now, I know none of us are ever going to be perfect. None of us are ever going to get it right all the time. But our goal should be, in every situation, to behave the way that Christ would have us behave. And there are two major enemies to the Christian life that they want to stop us from reaching that Christ-likeness. The first one's obvious. It's the devil. He can't stand it when we get closer to Christ. He can't stand it when we become more like Christ, because here's the thing. When we become more like Christ, it makes us that much more effective in reaching others for salvation. And we know that Satan doesn't want to see that happen. The other enemy, this is a little bit tougher to get under control. It's our own nature. It's our human nature. Think back to the story, I told of Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa. Human nature, they wanted to succeed, and they wanted to succeed so bad they were willing to bend, and not just bend, they were willing to break the rules for success. And our old nature does that. When it sees something it wants, it'll put that thought in our mind, and it'll push us to, how far will you go to achieve what you want? Are you willing to break your moral code? Are you willing to go against God's word to get something that you want? Where does this battle take place? It's obvious it takes place right in here, somewhere when the head knowledge of what God's word says has to get down into our heart and really become part of who we are. When that happens, that battle becomes much easier to win. It's not always going to be easy, and we're not always going to win it. But if we can get our knowledge of God's word from here to here, we've got a much stronger chance of winning that battle every time it pops up. Pep talked about consequences this week as the first barrier to try to help us overcome temptation. And it's so true. If we can understand and recognize the consequence, what our sin, what our action will cost us, that's that first barrier that kind of puts that check in you. Am I really willing to pay that cost? Am I willing to pay that price for this? I bet if you went back and asked Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa today, was it worth it for that one season? They'd probably say no. Pep relayed the story of Achan that's told in Joshua. He probably didn't think anybody would know that he had picked up that one little bit of the spoils from Jericho. He saw it. It was appealing to him. He didn't think it was going to affect anybody, so he went ahead and took it. But sin has consequences. And here's the progression. This is what leads us to sin. It's that progression. I saw, I coveted, or I wanted. I took, or I touched. I went ahead and did it. And then I hid. You see that all the way back in the Garden of Eden with the story of Adam and Eve, when Satan comes and tempts Eve to eat the fruit that they've been told to not touch. The first thing he does is he gets her to look at it and see that it's attractive, see that it's beautiful. I bet it tastes so good. So she sees it. Now she's processing all this other information. Oh, I bet it tastes good. I really want that. I really want that. And then she takes the bite, and she does, and Adam goes through the same process. He sees it. It's beautiful to the eye. It tastes good. Oh, I want it. Okay, I'm going to take the bite. And then they hear God walking in the garden. And their response, because they knew they had broken God's word, they knew they had done wrong, they went and hid. Sin has consequences, and unfortunately, those consequences aren't always isolated to just me or to just whoever commits the sin. There's three people that can suffer consequences when sin happens. The first is God's people. In the story of Achan, Israel suffered because of one man's sin. They went to battle against this puny little city of Ai, and they got routed, and 36 Israelites lost their lives because of Achan's sin. His nation suffered. God's people suffered. His family suffered. When his sin was found out, the punishment wasn't just handed down to Achan. It was handed down to his wife, his kids, his livestock. Everything associated with Achan was destroyed. And then finally, when we sin, we suffer. Sin's always going to have an effect on us in the negative. It may not be immediate. It may not be right in that moment, but ultimately there's going to be a price to pay. And it's not going to be a pleasant price. It's not going to be a cheap price. It's going to be very expensive. We've got a few more weeks as we're going to keep talking about temptation. Use these barriers that Pepe's given us each week. Put them into play in your life. If for no other reason than when you start to act, you can start going through this checklist that we're going to get over the next few weeks and start right away. What's the consequence of my action? Who's going to suffer? Who's going to feel the effect of this action? And remember, it's not just going to be you. Is what you're getting ready to do that's sinful, is it worth the price for those around you that you're going to have to watch them go through it too? Connect groups are going great. We've had a lot of fun talking about God's Word in our group. I hope you're having a good time in your group. And I just hope that as we tackle these questions and as we go through temptation, that the information that we're talking about will be helpful to you in your life. And I hope that you can help each other as you go around your circle and you talk about things, and you talk about struggles, and you talk about ways to overcome them. I hope that brings you all together and gives you one more tool in the battle against temptation. Hope you all have a great day, and we'll see you next week.
Jesus, Jesus.